Hi everyone, and welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. This is the last chapter, Chapter 8, of Why is Deku So Good with Kids? Chapter 8 is entitled In Which Shota Fixes Things. Shota stormed down to the teacher's lounge, not even trying to come up with what his opening words would be. He was too damn angry to plan out a logical argument at this point. He slammed open the door, ignoring the shocked expressions of all of the teachers present, and jabbed a finger into All Might's chest. You told Midoriya he couldn't be a hero while you were on a roof? What kind of teacher are you? Anyone with half a brain would know that's a terrible idea. Hisashi was across the room in a second, rubbing a hand over Shota's shoulder and trying to get him to calm down while All Might looked somewhere between being stunned and bewildered. Shota wasn't done ranting yet, chest heaving with rage. And then you told him he couldn't be a hero because he was quirkless, which is ridiculous when you consider the fact that Midoriya is one of the best, if not the best, at analysis skills in the entire school, which you would know if you talked to him for more than 10 seconds instead of crushing his dreams like a fuck. Shota, Hisashi warned, voice low and quiet. What exactly are we talking about? Nomuri asked from across the room, looking marginally terrified. It wasn't often that Shota went completely off the handle like this, and all of the teachers in the room were staring at him in different degrees of shock. That's when Nezu started laughing. Shota honestly hadn't noticed that Nezu was in the room when he walked in, but now it was a hard fact to avoid, with Nezu cackling from a homemade nest on the couch. Midoriya-kun opened up to you then? He asked, slipping off the couch to trot over to them. Shota relaxed away from All Might, shoving his hands in his pockets and trying very hard not to sulk. Hisashi didn't remove his hand from Shota's shoulder, just rubbing his thumb over his trapezius, watching Nezu thoughtfully. All Might suddenly seemed to understand what was going on, to Shota's immense relief, because what kind of teacher doesn't remember crushing a middle schooler's dreams? I wanted him and Bakugo to both go into therapy, Shota told Nezu firmly, and Bakugo needs some anger management classes or something to get him to be less prideful, because it's just a matter of time before he starts bullying people again because he doesn't have an alternate outlet. Bakugo, All Might echoed, looking confused as Nezu decided to start nodding thoughtfully. Determined to ignore All Might for now, Shota continued, it's going to take some work to get Midoriya-kun to even think that therapy is a viable option for him, based on the discrimination he's faced with therapists in the past, but I think it's important for him to get some help with this kind of issues he's facing. Discrimination, Nomuri said, looking at the group with a great deal of confusion. Midoriya Izuku, Shota spat, glaring at All Might again, was functionally quirkless until the morning of the entrance exam, and this absolute, he struggled with words for a second, pointing angrily at All Might. This absolute nincompoop, Nezu supplied, grinning chaotically. Nincompoop, Shota agreed, raising his voice again. Hisashi squeezed his shoulder lightly, and he got a hold of himself, told the sacrificial, maybe suicidal, bullied and extremely discriminated against problem child that he couldn't be a hero because he was quirkless. Hisashi and Nomuri were now glaring at All Might too, and he told him that on a roof, after a traumatic incident and directly after his childhood friend told him to commit suicide. The rest of the teachers joined in on the glaring at that point. All Might opened and closed his mouth a few times, at a loss for words, and Shota felt a sort of vindictive triumph when All Might finally spoke and said quietly, I recognize my mistake. Well, isn't that... You've proved your point, Hisashi said, turning Shota away and starting to push him out of the room. I think it's probably best if we go now. Not done, Shota said, ducking under Hisashi's arm and marching over to Nezu. I want to completely obliterate Aldera Junior High in a court of law. Nezu grinned evilly, evidently excited about the prospect of chaos that would cause. I'll start putting together a case. Could you send Midoriya to my office later? Yes, thank you. Sending All Might a dirty look, Shota left the room. He knew he'd probably have to apologize for that outburst later to the teachers in the lounge, and also probably to Midoriya for sharing that without his permission. Shota might have lost his head in there a little, but honestly, everything All Might had done on that day was wrong. It was hypocritical of All Might to say that Midoriya couldn't be a hero because he was quirkless. 1-2. Based on the information from Midoriya, and All Might was constantly saying that anyone could be a hero if they wanted. It was part of what made him so awe-inspiring. He had faith in everyone's ability to do good things, except for quirkless people, apparently. Shota was tempted to kick a wall. Instead, he walked back to his classroom and waited for his class of problem children to come back from lunch. Eri, escorted by Togura, came into the room a few minutes before he was expecting the class, and he stood up, marginally alarmed. His little panicky dad voice started rushing in on him before he could stop it, and he mentally started running through everything that could be wrong before, thank goodness, Togura said brightly, I need to run a few tests on quirk stuff with Nijiri-chan. Would it be okay if Eri-chan stays in here for a bit? I should only be gone for about an hour. Slouching back down into his chair to try to regain his dignity, Shota nodded stiffly. Eri gave Togura a departing wave and came hesitantly over to him. She was holding a notebook that looked suspiciously like the ones Midoriya used, and she had several colored pencils in her hand. Can I sit in Deku-kun's desk and draw? She asked, holding up the notebook. He gave her a warm smile and nodded. After giving him a somewhat curious look, she returned it and clambered into Deku's seat, flipping over her notebook, and started a doodle, tongue sticking out of the corner of her mouth. Shota watched her absent-mindedly until his students arrived. Midoriya looked tense, especially when he made eye contact with Shota, and his entire body tightened up like he was expecting to get hit. Shota just gave him a tired smile, not really wanting to go digging into the psychology of what happens when every teacher in a student's life turns a blind eye to bullying. When Midoriya saw Eri in his seat, his entire mood shifted. His shoulders relaxed and he beamed, bounding across the room to her. Eri-chan, he sang, scooping her up and kissing her little horn. What are you doing in my chair? Drawing, she announced, pointing at her notebook. I'm making some more quirk notes and a costume for you, Deku-kun. Are you now? He cooed, leaning over the paper curiously. I love it, he said a moment later, returning his eyes to meet hers. They held each other's gaze for a moment, each of them appearing to be gauging the other's moods, and then, as if they'd received some silent cue, they both burst into motion, Midoriya climbing into his desk and setting Eri on his lap while grabbing one of her pencils and starting to sketch in her notebook as she started jabbering about capes. Midoriya paid close attention to everything she said, and Shota was once again impressed by how much the kid cared. Too focused to take his attention away from Eri, he barely glanced up as Uraraka sat down in front of him. Shota had decided permanently to keep Bakugo in the back since Uraraka seemed to be a calming influence on Midoriya. Midoriya passed his pencil to Eri, saying something to her as she seized it and started drawing, nodding as he spoke. The two of them were just too cute, honestly. Shota stood up and started his class. After a while, it was Hizashi's turn to teach, and Shota took Eri from Midoriya, who looked a little disgruntled, but allowed it. He led Eri out of the classroom and began to search for Togura, who really should have been back by now. Nothing probably happened, but it was a good idea to check, especially when Nijiri was involved. She could be a bit chaotic force sometimes, which wasn't always exactly healthy for Togura to be around. He was walking next to Eri, who had wiggled out of his arms as soon as they were out of the classroom and was now excitedly showing him her drawings, which were actually pretty good. And this one I did because I think Deku-kun should have a cape, so I drew him in one, and this one is the spiky mean person being mean. I drew his angry eyebrows, see? Shota did see, and he would have laughed at the very two angry lines on the page if he weren't desperately trying to keep a straight face right now. This one is Uraraka and Deku. They're always looking at each other and then blushing and not looking at each other anymore. They are very good friends. Shota hadn't actually noticed that particular tidbit until this moment, and he was starting to second-guess his decision to switch Uraraka and Bakugo's seats. This one is the crazy lemon demon. It looked like it was supposed to be Kirishima. What that had to do with lemons, Shota had no idea. She flipped the page, and Shota almost gasped. There was the most beautiful sketch on the next page of Deku crouching down and holding his arms protectively around Eri, like a personal shield. It was way too well done to have been drawn by Eri, so he could only guess that Midoriya had drawn it in class just now, which was really impressive, since when had his problem child been able to draw like that? Deku drew this one, Eri told him, tracing her fingers over it gently. He's really good at drawing, and I can't ever get it right, so I asked him to draw it for me. Shota was a bit at loss for words. It is really good, Eri. He pulled out his phone, something he never did in school unless it was an emergency. This wasn't really an emergency, but it was close enough. Do you mind if I take a picture of that? He asked, already positioning his phone. She nodded and held out the notebook steady while he took a few pictures of the sketch. Holy shit, problem child can draw. Deku-kun was happy today, Eri said when he was done, looking carefully over the drawing. She looked up at him, and there really shouldn't be so much wisdom hidden behind those eyes. Did you talk to him? Shota nodded. I did. Eri hummed thoughtfully. Good. I think he'll be better now. She skipped off ahead, explaining to Shota exactly why Deku needed to add a cape to his costume, which he listened to intently, although part of his brain was off thinking about Midoriya and wondering if Eri was right. Nezu put together a case against Aldera surprisingly quickly. Midoriya put up a bit of a fight at first, trying to protest his old school and not be a bother, whatever that meant, but after every single faculty member present and his mother had explained that it probably wasn't just him being affected by the intentional negligence of the Aldera staff, he'd relented and helped Nezu build a case. Actually, his cooperation was crucial to their cause, but talking about it brought a lot of painful things to light, so Midoriya had a bad couple of days as he methodically worked through his past with both Nezu and Hound Dog, whom Shota had finally convinced Midoriya to see. Luckily, his friends and Eri managed to pull him out of the worst of it, and Shota and Eri set up a signal so they could warn each other when Midoriya seemed out of it. The day after he set up that signal with Eri, he made one with Midoriya too for when Eri was having a bad day. After the case building was over, Midoriya went back to his usual chipper self. Bakugo was put into anger/pride management classes with Hound Dog 2 days a week, which almost led him to losing control of himself and attacking Midoriya in class. Luckily, Midoriya had been holding Eri at the time, so Bakugo couldn't do anything, and Midoriya was able to keep a level head. Since then, he'd been getting better, making a lot of improvement in a short time. His gigantic ego had already deflated a bit, which actually made him a lot easier to deal with. Shota did not apologize to All Might. He deeply considered it, especially after Hisashi gave him a half-hearted lecture about teacher's lounge etiquette, and then decided against it. Hopefully All Might would use Shota's words to learn how to be a better teacher, and if he didn't, well, Shota would just have to give him another scolding then. All of the teachers participated in a class about quirk discrimination, and Shota learned a lot more about both Midoriya and Eri because of it. There was now a printed picture of a beautiful sketch hanging on Shota's refrigerator, and he still refused to tell Hisashi where he'd gotten it. Hisashi found all of this hilarious and kept threatening to adopt both Midoriya and Eri so that Shota could have them around more often. He also kept referring to Midoriya as Eri and Shota's kids, which was fine except for when they were in meetings with teachers, or worse, with Midoriya and the teachers. Hisashi didn't seem to care who the audience was and continued joking about it to Shota's immense embarrassment. And then Nezu had picked up on it and, enjoying the chaotic energy like he does, had joined in, and now it was just a whole mess. Shota Todoroki had even come up to Shota at one point and asked him if Midoriya and Eri were his secret love children. Shota didn't even know what to do with that, and he just stared at the poor kid until Uraraka, snickering behind him, came up and dragged Todoroki off. Midoriya was going to be just fine, and so was Eri. The two of them looked out for each other, and now they had one very protective Eraserhead looking out for both of them too. This concludes How is Deku So Good with Kids? Such a great fic. I hope you guys really enjoyed this whole series. Let me know if there's any other fics like this or more that you guys suggest. Otherwise, it's been great reading this with you. Thank you so much.